So, dear friends, it looks like the time here. Sorry for some technical problems, but I really would like to invite everybody who is with us to join the lecture about the urban inequalities and development. I'm Vladimir Kozlov, the academic supervisor of the Population and Development Master Program, and also working here as an associate professor in the Institute for Demography. And yeah, here we are. First of all, I should give you the broad picture of the urban economic and population groups, and then we will highlight some global challenges that we face sometimes. And we see that now the share of urban population is higher than the rural population. We cannot say that it's much higher, but still generally. And if we compare it with the situation that took place less than 70 years ago. So generally, there are plenty of persons in our Earth that could remember this period of time. Of course, now they're old, but there are not so small. There is not so small number of them, but still generally. So previously, the number of persons living in the city, in 1950, was much smaller, was maybe 6 times smaller, and so on. So it was a really incredible growth within the period of living of 2 generations, and it's a very remarkable figure. And this is a graph, and with a forecast. It means that generally in 30 years, so plus 1 generation, and we will live in the territory when 2/3 of the persons on our planet are living in urban areas. And of course, such a strong growth, it was followed by some very interesting challenges, and unfortunately, as everything that grows so fast, it followed by some really strong inequality problems we are going to talk about. And well, there is a slide about the data sources, and generally we also manage some other ones. If you're interested, you can go look at them and follow them more in details. And generally, some quick facts. So when we say that the urban population is growing, it doesn't mean that the rural population all over the world is falling down by the size and so on. No, rural population is also growing, but it's growing slowly. And for example, rural population now is living mainly in Africa and Asia. 90% of the persons are living in Africa and Asia, in the rural areas. And of course, they're living mainly in India, and it's followed by China. So the rapid urbanization will be, in most of the cases, urbanization of the Africa and India. And the problem is that within these countries, there are very huge inequality problems on the country level. And if you take a look at the regional level, and if you take a look at the urban-rural level, you will find that they are even huger, and so on. So it will be a big challenge. And this is how the situation with urbanization looks like several years ago in 1960. So there were really few high urbanized countries, mainly America, Canada, Northern European countries, Australia, New Zealand, and so on. All this stuff is demonstrated in this. And this is a number of the multi-million cities in the least developed regions. You see that maybe there were not so many multi-million cities in developing countries. And well, the rapid growth, it started only in 1980s after the demographic transition and very huge population growth. So in this case, we should say that the urban growth was unpredictably high, especially in 70s and 90s. Nowadays, it's still high, but generally it's more or less predicted. And now we could talk about some problems of development and so on, and solve some of these problems, because previously we could just observe. We didn't think about the inequalities. Actually, we just observe the phenomena in most of the cases. So this is the map with a number of cities, and with their growth rates. Yes, I already told you, Africa, India, and some Asian countries, like, for example, Gulf countries, have demonstrated the highest growth. And especially now, of course, also in China, you see the rapid urbanization, and in some Gulf countries, and so on. And this is the figures about the expected growth. The expected growth, we find, well, that it will be mainly in Africa and some Indian cities. And Europe, you will find not the growth, but the stagnation or even the decline of the urban population. And before we talk about urban inequalities, we should say that while there are different, urbanization is different all over the world, all over the continents, and so on. We should say that, for example, half of the world's urban dwellers reside in settlements with fewer than 500,000 inhabitants. So generally, the urbanization doesn't mean that only the multi-millionaire cities grows. No, doesn't matter. But still, generally, growing in big cities, growing in small cities, and it's very interesting. And then the other interesting situation is the migration flows between these cities, which is another question to discuss, and so on. And then, if you take a look at the mega cities, we see that about 12% living of the world urban population are living in a real 10 billion and high inhabitant mega cities, which is interesting. And well, if you take a look at the forecast, we should say that in 10 years, the world is projected to have 43 mega cities, mainly in developing regions. I already saw them. And yeah, these are the list of them. You'll see that still Tokyo, then Delhi, and so on. And well, if you want to look at the inequalities, let's look at the maps. So generally, there is a urbanization as relative figures since 70s. So this is a percentage of urban population in 70, and how it looks like in 2018. You will see how strong it the map, and generally nowadays it's not an easy task to find really not urbanized part of the world. Here you see it's mainly some parts of South Asia and Africa. And you see that in 20 years, the share of the territories will be much lower. And for example, China will be a highly urbanized center. And generally, how we can measure if it is a real development or no. And if you take a look, if you want to look at the broad picture, let's take a look at the night lights. Yeah, maybe some of you know that the pictures with night lights, they give us a very good proxy of development, and they generally, in this case, we could look at the let's say main rural urban centers, and if it looks equal, and so on. So let's look at the pictures from satellite with night lights. So that's how it looked. And here you can find that some of the broad cities are really visible here. Yeah, for example, if you look at the Europe, you will see just the whole coverage by the night lights. The same with the eastern part of the United States of America. And also you can see Moscow here, for example, the place from which we are broadcasting. And we see that, for example, well, generally India is not so bright, Africa is not so bright, and so on. So we see that generally, if we measure the development by night lights, well, these inequalities between very big cities are really visible here. And let's go into details. Yeah, this is the European urbanization, where, well, generally all the big cities are lighted, and so only the territories not covered by the lights. It's mainly there are not so many cities, villages, and the other territories there, and the other places of live there. However, generally, you still see the contrast between Western Europe and Eastern Europe here on the map. Yeah, you find here cities, but generally you find that the territory of Europe, of Western Europe, is more or less equally developed, and in the territory of Eastern Europe, yeah, you see the spots of the cities, but still generally there are some urban places that demonstrate very low levels of development. What we can see in the United States of America, more or less smooth general situations. There are some territories, but they're without lights. So generally here you can see Mexico City in Mexico. It's very also visible part on the map, but generally you see that the northern part of Mexico generally doesn't have these bright lights. Then East Asia. In East Asia you see Japan, South Korea, and centers of development of China, and you see that maybe not so many lights in urban China. And here, this is a part of the map from the Facebook devoted to development, and you see the contrast between South Korea and North Korea. Yeah, by lights, everything is visible, and generally there shouldn't be any comments. Actually, also you see the contrast between Russian Far East and China, for example, and Japan also. There is a situation when you see the differences in development, and generally, even if you see big cities, well, there are some spots, but the suburbs, for example, are almost invisible here. This is South Asia. Yeah, you can see New Delhi, some Indian cities, and Pakistan in the value, and the other territories of India are not so generally developed, as you see by lights. And for example, here you can see Bangkok and Thailand, the most developed country for the South Eastern Asia, and the other parts, and the other cities, Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh, which are generally big, but they don't generate so much light. And so you see that even within this subregion, the differences in development are really visible, and they're visible from satellites, and they're visible on the maps now. And here, this is the last one for the map. For this map, this is Africa. Now you can see just some parts of the country. They have really developed cities. So, for example, the Cairo and the whole generally Nile River. Well, you can also see some parts of South African Republic here, and Nigerian Lagos. There are other territories, even if they have big cities, like, for example, Nairobi or Mombasa in Kenya. Yeah, here, Nairobi. Or maybe some Ghanaian cities. You generally almost don't see them. And this is, for example, in comparison with Gulf countries here, you can see that, well, the level of development is very low here. And these black territory, very unlighted territory, will be soon, within the next decade, covered by the sports of the cities. And generally, we don't know if they will be developed or not, so we don't know how bright these sports are going to be. I hope that everything will be fine and we will see really bright sports, but who knows? Generally, as I already told, the urbanization about near future, it will add additional 2.5 billion to the world's urban population by 2050. And almost 90% of this will happen in Asia and Africa. As I already told you, well, this territory will be covered by the light sports, and this one as well, maybe here, and so on. And generally, now let's stop on some more additional examples and case studies for the problems of urbanization and inequalities. So generally, well, as I already told, mainly the future urban population is going to live in African and Asian countries. But mainly, if you go deeper, we will find that there are 3 countries where this population is going to live. It's India, China, and Nigeria. So today is expected to account for 35% of the growth of the world's urban population by 2015. First of all, India, they project more than 400 million. In China, more than 2.5 millions, and in Nigeria, almost 200 millions. And well, it means that the problems with inequality of the urban populations, they depend on the situation in these countries. And generally, we should say that Nigeria is one of the least equal parts of the world, these equal countries of the world. Because, for example, GDP per capita in Nigeria is relatively high in comparison with the neighboring countries. But if you look at all these inequality indicators like, for example, Gini coefficients and so on, they will be generally one of the worst in the world. In case of India, India used to be more or less equal several decades ago, but they were equal in their poverty. And now, generally, there are some stratas of the populations that are becoming relatively rich. They are even living in the cities and so on. And generally, this population growth, which is almost 500 million. In this case, we should say that we expect the growth of different categories of population, both rich and both relatively poor, who will come there from the rural areas. Well, in China, the population growth is also, well, they expect it very high, but as a very high figures. But in case of China, we should say that the country is more or less developed already. I'd rather say developed. So in this case, we can expect that now, for example, they try to solve problems with inequality, because the country is developed, rich, but still unequal. And well, the urban inequality still will exist in China for the recent decades, because we will see the persons coming from the villages with really low skills, low educations coming to the cities, they will be deprived and so on. So in this case, now for China, the next step is not the development of the country, the very high figures of growth of the GDP, but mainly trying to solve the question, trying to develop new general cities and try to implement into the city life the persons from the from the rural territories, which will be a challenge. But generally, the same challenge was observed even in Europe a century ago, in Russia half a century ago, and well, sometimes the countries cope with it. Now it's widespread in Latin America, so that's very wide phenomena and so on. So these are the trends of urbanization, this percentage of urban population, and so on. In this case, we see that, well, more developed regions already reached a certain optimum, and as I told about Latin America and Caribbeans, they are also here, and yeah, all this Southern Asia are still trying to catch them, Northern Africa, Southern Asia, Southeast Asia, and so on. They're just catching the developed countries and see what will happen. So these are some examples of the countries when you can see different tracks. For example, there are the tracks of the stable urbanization, like in Egypt, for example. Well, very rapid growing, like in China, for example, or in Indonesia. And yeah, for example, in India, the trend is not flat, but also not so generally predictable, and so on. And also, there are some countries that just started to go on the way of urbanization. This is, for example, Ethiopia. Very interesting example. So for many decades, Ethiopia was one of the least developed countries in the world, and now they generally enjoy a very huge growth, and they have a really strong decline of fertility and growth of life expectancy and so on. We see that the demographic transition, for example, already happens in Ethiopia. There is an economic growth and so on. So, and yeah, we will see what will happen with the urbanization, and we will see in the Ethiopian cities, well, if they will be developed or not. And yeah, some controversial trends and some citizen growth. So we see that cities are mainly drivers of innovations and new ideas. And that this growth and development can be considered as sustainable. This is still an open question, as we already talked a bit earlier. And generally, I don't know, you can write the answer on this question on the chat. Do you think that, well, if the cities, the big cities, the mega cities, well, there are maybe three, there are 30 of them, and soon we will have 40 or 45 of them. And do you think that these big cities will be the centers and drivers of innovation and new ideas? And do you think that if we grow by developing the biggest cities, do you think that this growth will be sustainable or not? So in this case, I don't know, maybe you can share your ideas here in chat. And Well, and then another problem: to what extent could inequality affect sustainability? So in this case, we know that in most of the cases when we talk about sustainability, we mean something connected with environment protection or some ecological issues and so on. But generally, still the question is open. Maybe the economic inequality or inequality of education or inequality in health and so on could generally affect sustainability. At least if we look at the indicators of sustainability, we will find that inequality, not only in ecology, not only in, let's say, environment protection, plays a very huge role for the conservation of the economic decline and so on, and general and sustainable development. Well, these ones are sustainable development goals, and we can find here that, well, there is still one point about reducing inequalities and one point about the sustainable cities and communities. So generally they are posted fairly close to each other. And well, this is a problem in this case, and this problem could be solved in line. For example, we cannot say that we could solve the 10th problem without paying no attention to 11th, and vice versa, and so on. And now, for example, we should say that urban growth is closely related to 3 dimensions of sustainable development: economic, social, and environmental. Yeah, I already answered this question, and so on. And also, I should say that, well, if you're interested in urban development, well, the key solution of all the problems, including demographic ones and including the inequality ones, is a successful management of the urban growth. So in this case, it could not be just uncontrolled. We should generally, in most of the cases, try to manage it, try to find a solution, and so on. And well, generally, what is well-managed urbanization? Because I told you about the management, but what we know about the well-managed situation. So we understand the population trends over the online, over the long run, not only the short term, but the long terms. We try to give all the services for all, because, yeah, one of the main idea of the urban life is that you could genuinely get here much more services in comparison with the rural one. And also within this new management, well management, and so on, we should focus on the needs of the urban poor and other vulnerable groups for such stuff as housing, education, healthcare, decent work, and safe environment. So generally, within the system of the really well-managed urbanization, you see that everything should work together, and so on. So it's not an easy task to organize all this stuff. Well, what are the challenges for the sustainable development? I should say that rapid urbanization is exerting pressure on freshwater supplies, sewage, and living environment, and public health as well. So in this case, if more and more population is coming to the cities, and if we have the system of the poor urban management, per urbanization management, we will see the interesting picture. So the persons are coming to get a high involvement in the services, but the problem is that these services, in most of the cases, could not be achieved by them. They're the key, but they cannot get them. Yeah, because there is a system of the overbooking. Everything is already taken by the other persons. And for example, there were some estimations that in 2016, 90% of urban dwellers have been breathing unsafe air. And well, generally, some specialists told that there were more than 4 million deaths due to ambient air pollution. And more than half of the global urban population were exposed to air pollution levels at least 2 and 5 times, so, or maybe sometimes even 3 times higher than the safety standard. It depends on the standard, because in some of the countries and in some of the cities, even this safety standard, it includes the figures that in The other, for example, developed countries is used for the polluted or highly polluted territories, and so on. So, but if you look at the Sustainable Development Goals 11, that generally concerns mainly about the urban development. It says that by 2030, there should be access to all adequate, safe, and affordable housing and basic services, and generally all the slums in 10 years. Well, they shouldn't be eradicated. It looks like it's impossible. They should be upgraded. So in this case, the slums could be integrated in the real urban territory. Yeah, because what is slum? Slum generally is another very strong indicator of the urban life inequalities. So in the situation when the migration to the cities is much higher than the capacities of the cities to give all these additional goods, all these additional social services, for the persons moving into the cities. Well, the next point, 2013. Provide access to safe, affordable, accessible, sustainable transport system, improving road safety, and expanding public transport, with special attention to needs of the vulnerable categories, which is a very decent target and a very decent goal, and so on. Because here, as in the developed countries, we can find that the transport system is improving and so on. In most of the developing countries, for example, we can hardly find underground and the other public transportation system, which are obvious in Europe, for example, in North America. And in this case, also the traffic jams, the system of traffic jams management and development countries in developing countries also doesn't work properly, and so on and so on. So in these cases, it's a really huge challenge. 1130. Enhancing inclusive and sustainable urbanization capacity for participatory, integrated, and sustainable human settlement planning and management in all countries, which is most of the cases declarative stuff. Then, strengthen efforts to protect and safeguard the world's cultural and natural heritage, which is also very obvious, and nobody can agree more with it. So, generally, it's agreed by everybody. Everybody understands that it should be like this. World culture and national heritage, but who knows if in 10 years it could be possible for all the cities. Looks like that it couldn't be possible for all of them. Then generally by 2030, if you talk about the demography and if you talk about the problems of inequality, we should say that one of the goals have a generally declares the opportunity to significantly reduce the number of deaths and the number of people affected by substantial decrease. And in this case, it could be also give the persons opportunity in the cities to prepare for disasters, and also give them generally better medical care and all the other infrastructure development. So to other questions, yeah, by 2030, there is an obligation to reduce the adverse per capita environment impact of cities, which is generally also the problem and also one of the reasons for discrepancies between the cities in developed and developing world. Yeah, the air quality, waste management, and so on. Because of course there are plenty of different solutions, but lots of them, for example, if you try just to import them to the developing world from the developed ones, well, with those adaptations, they don't work. Then another situation, 11.7, so green public space, which is also very important. But looks like that this idea of green public space was taken into consideration just several years ago, and firstly mainly in Europe. And we'll see how it works. Well, then there are some additional sustainable development goals, support positive economic, social, and environment links between different areas. Then about the risk management of the disasters, and of course supporting the least developed countries here, because they going to be the home of the really huge number of persons. And in these cases, maybe without the international aid, they cannot build, they cannot construct a very sustainable system in this case. So some demographic factors. We should say that previously, before the epidemiological transition, before the fast improvement were taken into consideration, there was so-called city penalty for infection diseases, because the persons in cities were living in such a huge density that, for example, they had infection diseases much more often in comparison with the persons from the countryside. But it happened maybe more than 100 years ago in Europe and so on, but still somehow it maybe exists in some African countries. But looks like that nowadays it's not so bad situation. Well, there is another problem, that maybe the air pollution in the cities could be converted into this situation with the city penalty. Yeah, but in this case, maybe it's not infection diseases, but heart diseases, respiratory diseases, malignant neoplasmoids, and so on. And another problem is, for example, accidents and new infection risks. And these are some demographic factors from China. For example, in case of cardiovascular diseases, well, some Chinese specialist experts, they found that if, for example, the Chinese pollution will just get the standards of world, the yield on the health benefits in China will be really improving. So in this case, it could be very interesting stuff. But there is a problem that, for example, the persons sometimes combine this situation. For example, they live in the territories of the high pollution, and, for example, smoke, or, for example, they drink regular, and in this case, they have the problem with the blood pressure, and so on. Well, then another candidate to make the problems of the urban inhabitants much worse, especially in the cities of the developing countries, well, this is the lung cancer, because there is a strong association between lung cancer and not only smoking, but also between lung cancer and pollution in some cases, especially sulfur exits and some PM. So controlling for all behavior factors, there is still in China, for example, a very huge association. And, well, if we talk about the other demographic constraints, we will find that, well, still the problem of water access, sanitation, and sewage within the rapidly growing cities exists. Yeah, because if the cities are growing too fast, well, soon we realize that we don't have reserves for any water access or sanitation. What should be done in this case? Well, at least the persons, the mayors of the cities, or maybe the governance itself, and so on, they should start thinking. They should start realizing what's the problem here. The problem of healthcare facilities quality, also another situation. Maybe you have so many persons coming for one particular coming to one particular hospital, or to one particular, I don't know, doctor, and so on, that, well, the system generally stops working. And, well, if we go back to the city penalty, it's very interesting what demographic factors could stop the population growth and in what territory of the world. If you read, just rest me. Then, the fertility and urbanization. In most of the cases, fertility leads to the drop in urbanization. Well, urbanization gives to the drop of the fertility, and if you take a look at the biggest city of the world, we will find that there is a very low level of fertility there. For example, in India, in Calcutta, the number of persons for one woman, well, is almost 2 times less than in the other territory of India, which is very huge, and that also gives us hints about the unequal development of the country. Then in Chinese cities, for example, fertility is lower than 1 for a long period of time. Then also, if you talk about the internal migrants to the city, we talked that maybe if there are too many persons in one territory, this territory could face a lack of the public goods, and really huge number of the labor force that's underdeveloped, and also housing markets generally it's really not so easy to prepare their behavior because they have some persons from different culture in this case, coming from the villages, coming from the countryside. And even in the bigger cities, there is this problem. For example, even in the developed countries now, with the migration, there is a problem. But in this case, if we are talking about the European cities and US cities, we are talking not about internal migration, but about the external migrations. Persons from the less developed countries come and bring in their culture, and it is different. And generally, the population of these two groups of persons is also unequal, and so on. Well, and you should say that finally, in Africa, these challenges are much more severe because the social system is not adapted. The economic growth is not so easy to predict, and generous demographic transitions in all these countries is much poorer and less pronounced in this particular country. And now we should go to some other parts of inequalities. Yeah, because we talked about health inequalities. A few words about the wage inequalities. There are 3 examples here. One is about the United States of America, developed country, where the big cities still demonstrate the strong trend of growing and stagnant economic growth. But the problem is following. The problem is, well, that for 27, almost for 30 years, we will see that, for example, the median of the wage in big American cities doesn't grow. So they were somehow splitted in different clusters, and generally these clusters are going less and less familiar. So in China, the problem is that the urban inequalities are always spurred by the number of the local persons going there. The same will be really close to this will be found in India. Very close will be found to India. So, but what is the solution of the wage inequality? Well, in most of the cases, the school has stopped at the situation that generally there is a human capital and special skills programs and so on that could somehow solve the wage inequality. That in most of the cases, the wage inequality is not provoked by the statistical discrimination. So in some cases, this is just an obvious situation that the workers from the countryside, they didn't receive such a huge education. So this is our wage challenges. Then another wage challenges is the social workers and some social and the other development agents and so on who are coming into the schools, and generally most of the specialists don't understand properly what they do there. So a few words about the cities that solved these problems. These are the links that you could follow. But you will find that, well, here are the most comfortable cities, in the year. Of the year 2017. And, well, this is the map when they're situated. And in these cases, this is another map. You can just take a look. And if you look at the list of these cities, you will find that, well, the world lead is Vienna, then Zurich, Vancouver, München, Auckland, Düsseldorf, Frankfurt, Copenhagen, Geneva, and Basel. So these are German-speaking countries plus a bit North European countries. And a bit surprising that we have here, for example, Auckland, which is generally also in the developed countries, New Zealand, but generally is it a big cities, is it comfortable or no? So this is still an open question. So this is very interesting how they solved. But for the other for the other cities, well, these challenges have just begun. So, and in this case, I suppose that lots of you will work with these problems of inequality, and you will try to make the solutions by yourselves, and so on. And you see that, well, inequality is not only economics. We saw here the problems of the health inequality. We saw here that it was a problem of the urban inequalities because of the wages, and this urban inequality because of the wages was based on the inequalities in education, the differences between education in educational skills between the different population groups coming into the cities. And some of these population groups with low levels of education, they are by definitions caught by the subsample of the underskilled workers and so on. And in this case, without education, for example, it's not an easy task to get success in this society, and so on. So generally, to sum up, I should say that, well, we observe the rapid economic growth, and unfortunately, within this very rapid economic growth, we cannot say that everything is going so smooth and sustainable and so on, nothing of the kind. There are plenty of territories when the special sustainable programs for the development either should be adopted or are already adopted, and so on. So maybe some of you will work on that. And now I should genuinely say that it was really nice to give a sort of the lecture for you. And now I could genuinely answer the questions if you have any. And bye. Hope to see you maybe somewhere, maybe on the other lectures.